have some people streaming in here. Good morning or good afternoon or even good evening, wherever you're joining us from.
Yes, welcome everyone. Very excited to be here for today's webinar that is going to be looking at important questions around evidence building and impact in educational technologies, EdTech, with exciting panelists that are joining us today from different parts of the world. And I'm sure people are joining also from different parts of the world too. So we'll try to make this an international conversation across the borders, as it says in the title.
Actually, in the chat, if participants are able to write in where, or attendees are able to write in where they're joining from, we'd love to see where you're all calling in from today. All right, well, we wait for that to come in. We'll wait for some more people to join us. I can start by saying, since we're saying where we're all from, I'm joining us from New York City. I think one of a number of US-based people in this call. Louisa, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just next to Boston.
Andrew, where are you calling in from?
I'm in downtown Los Angeles right now.
Nice. And Natalia, you're the farthest from us all, I believe.
Yes, but I consider some people from Europe as well. So I'm joining from Norway, Stavanger. It's on the coast.
Excellent. Looks like we have people joining from the Netherlands, Virginia, Colorado, Finland, the UK, Austria, Michigan in the US, Waterloo in Canada. Also, very wide-reaching group.
That's really nice to see.
All right. Well, one of our panelists, Maria, will be joining very shortly, but we have a lot to discuss, so we can get started. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate the interest. This is such an important topic, and it's great that people are interested in this. So I'm going to start our slide deck going. Thanks for joining us for EdTech Across Borders, Designing with International Standards for International Impact. We have a few panelists here joining us, but our hosts today are myself and Natalia. Natalia, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my full name is Natalia Kucirkova. I work as professor at the University of Stavanger and the Open University, and I also lead the International Center for EdTech Impact. And it is with that hat that I'm wearing today that I'll be talking about the work that I and colleagues have been doing in the space of research, certifications, and impact in EdTech.
Amazing. Thanks, Natalia. And my name is Parker Van Nostrand. I'm the Product Certifications Project Director at Digital Promise. I have a background in teaching middle school language arts and working in student operations in EdTech. And in my current role at Digital Promise, I help facilitate the creation, assessment, and awarding of product certifications for EdTech products. And Digital Promise is a US-based but global-facing nonprofit organization operating at the intersection of research and practice and technology within education. Yeah, and we're all thrilled that you're joining us today. We will move over to introducing our panelists, and Maria will hop on shortly. So Louisa, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Louisa Rosenheck. I am currently the Director of Learning Design at Kahoot. I also have a background in research and design and development of educational technology, especially learning games and simulations. I did research at MIT for many years, and my focus is really on inclusive design and playful learning, creative learning, ways to use technology to transform learning and understanding what the outcomes of that are.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, so my official title is Chief Data Science Officer. I tell people I'm the data guy. I oversee the research partnering for my organization, a nonprofit called Mind Research Institute. I've been doing it for about 20 years, and this is a very busy slide. Maybe you can scan it because I have 60 seconds or less, but I just wanted to kind of state where am I coming from? What's my lens and topic areas, maybe for questions down the road. So we're in the United States. One of the good things about for data in the United States is we have this universal cluster level data availability, like every school, every student, grades 3 through 8, and cluster level is publicly published. So I've spent all those 20 years figuring out what can you do when you have universal school level data. And you can do some cool stuff like measuring all the adoptions and a lot of nuance beyond kind of a go, no go, sort of a level of does something work or not. And then couple more things and my time will be up, which is great. But my position watching how the market treats EdTech programs is they're treated like a commodity. And so the little image there is, does it really matter whether you buy your gasoline from the station on the right side of the street, Shell maybe, or from Mobil? No, it doesn't matter. Gas is gas. It's a commodity. And unfortunately, I see this market needing the kind of maturing that these certifications, et cetera, are bringing to the market in a very, very bad way, because it turns out that not every program is the same as just gasoline or petrol from wherever you want to get it. So there is risk in switching. They're not interchangeable, and the market needs to learn a little bit more so it can hold us program providers accountable to continuously improving. That's it.
Thanks, Andrew. That helps us set the stage for this conversation, and Natalia is going to begin us on this conversation.
Yeah, and thanks, Andrew, for that perspective, because I think it's very important that we remain critical of the various ways in which evidence is defined and propagated and certified. And really, there is a lot of discussion happening about evidence on the international stage, as well as on the policy level, on teachers level. You know, teachers have different views on evidence than researchers might have, and researchers might have different views on evidence than parents might have, and all these stakeholders are important here, with the child at the center when we are talking about children's EdTech. So how do we make this work? And certifications of evidence are certainly not a, like a quick solution to a complex problem. They are perhaps more of a prompt for reflection on what is it that we certify, what is it that we value in evidence building. And today, as we talk a lot about evidence, we'll be essentially talking about the proof that something works. And this can be in the form of a research study, and can be a case study, a review. It can be an experimental study. It can be also a qualitative study. So there are different types of evidence, and these different types of evidence show different types of impact. So when it comes to certifications, we talk about different types of impact these certifications demonstrate. And I think we have on the next slide, Parker, an illustration for how these different certifications and understandings can be summarized in an umbrella framework that really takes into account both the teachers' perspectives in terms of effectiveness and the pedagogical value of different tools that are available to teachers, making sure that we also include efficacy here. I want to emphasize the importance of experimental design and the ESA standards in USA. They are certainly an important way of looking at evidence, but not the only way. And combining efficacy with effectiveness and the equity questions, ethics and environment has been something that colleagues and I have been trying to convey as an important mechanism for understanding holistically evidence in the space. I think when it comes to these holistic frameworks of evidence, it's very important to emphasize that it is really the balance between these different types of evidence that is important. So making sure that as different tools are being built, we may foreground one or the other type of evidence and impact building in specific contexts, but it doesn't mean that we should then forget about the other aspects. So if a technology is excellent at efficacy, that technology also needs to make sure that the data are protected, that there are some ethical guidelines that are followed, that children's perspectives are centered, that this is, equity by design, that teachers' voices are included, and that attention is paid to the environmental issues as well. So it's really about making sure that we understand impact more holistically as we are thinking about building certification systems and evidence in the space. And I think the work that Digital Promise has been doing on certifications fits very nicely. This understanding of looking across and different types of evidence under the E framework. So Parker, you perhaps want to follow up on this and say a bit more about how you've been thinking about the certifications available at Digital Promise and how it fits with the ICIE, or the International Certification of Evidence of Impact in Education.
Yeah, thank you. And that's so fascinating, Natalia. And I appreciate you setting that context, because I feel like Digital Promise is positioned as a bit of a case study within that context, that wider context that you're describing, as an organization that centers that intersection of research, practice, and technology in education. We feel we're in a prime position to help create and set signals for EdTech quality in the US and also internationally. So we have a number of product certifications where there's kind of a twofold goal here with the creation of certifications, very much in line with what Natalia just shared. The first is to set a really clear signal for EdTech developers about what it means to design a research-based quality piece of technology, and set that standard in a very transparent way so that it's anyone who's developing EdTech can find our certifications, can look at what our requirements are and know that they're able to design toward that. And that second goal then is to make it easier, and this is really crucial, and ultimately what it comes down to is making it easier for EdTech decision makers, whether that are school leaders or district leaders, school district leaders or school system leaders, making it easier for them to identify high quality education tools. There's so much on their plates. We know that everyone working in education has a lot on their plates. And so having a third-party system being able to validate that quality is incredibly valuable for school system leaders. So why should they, look to certifications and Digital Promise certifications as a case study in particular? Like, why should that trust be there? Well, all of our certifications, and the three that I've listed here are just three of many more, they are co-designed with educators and learners. So we have in-house content expertise, and we partner with other nonprofit organizations that have their content expertise. But we know that ultimately learners, educators, administrators are the ones that know teaching and learning needs the best. And so we co-design all certifications with them to make sure that these certifications are driven by authentic needs, that when you are a product applying to a certification, you know that this is something that educators actually care about. whether that's making sure that there's evidence that your product has a potential for impact for a population of learners, or that the design is based in learning sciences research, or that educators have the ability to help continually iterate on product development because the product developers take their needs and their concerns seriously and incorporate them into product design. So since I'm, in my own role, I'm working at this space of creating and assessing and awarding certifications to EdTech products, I'm always super fascinated to hear from EdTech developers and others working in the EdTech space who have expertise in standards and certification. So I'm really excited to get the chance to chat with our panelists today. And before we hop into discussion, we have Maria joining us. So Maria, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Parker, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. I'm Maria Barron. I'm a member of the EdTech Global Team and also an specialist in education and technology based in Washington, D.C., in the headquarters of the World Bank. Over to you, Parker and Natalia, for the discussion.
Lovely.
Thank you so much. So we'll start off with a question for all of our panelists. And Louisa, if you'd be able to start the answer to this. How does equity and effectiveness influence your work on product research or policy?
Yeah, big question. So at Kahoot, we think all of these aspects are very important. And whenever I design a tool or design a design process for an EdTech learning experience, it's really important to me to bake in all these things from the start, right? Equity and efficacy, good learning, what we know based on learning science. It can't be an afterthought. So what does that look like? When you design for equity and inclusion, there are a lot of practices, ways to include teacher voice, teacher input, like the certification that was mentioned, ways to co-design with learners, with students, especially with marginalized learners, whose voice is not as often included in a design, from the beginning. And universal design for learning is a great framework for this, and other methods too. They really show that when you include marginalized learners in the design from the beginning, it creates experiences that are better learning for everyone. So that is really important. And similarly with the learning sciences research and, what do we value? What is good pedagogy? Baking that in from the start is really important. And I know there's a certification for that too, sort of evidence by design. So as a learning designer at heart, those are really important to me. And I can share a white paper that I released recently about equitable design practices and inclusive design. So I'll drop that in the chat in a minute. So that's one really important component, is putting these ideas into your design process. And then sort of on the other end is the research and evaluation of your product. And that is also really important to sort of look back and say, okay, now that it's out there in the wild, it's teachers and students are using it. Is it working as intended? Is it doing what we wanted it to do? And of course, this kind of research is not simple. And I just want to point out that, one really important thing to think about is, what are we measuring? What is it that we care about? A lot of things that research studies often measure are kind of some of the more straightforward types of learning, content knowledge, retention, these things. And those are important. But we also need to think about more non-cognitive skills and, 21st century skills, future ready skills, all these things. How are our products designed to give students practice with these? And how do we see evidence of that in their use of the product, in the artifacts they create with the product, all of these kinds of things. So thinking about all these aspects, from the beginning in the design process all the way through to evaluation. And of course, it doesn't stop there, because with technology, it's never done. No product is ever done, really. We're always iterating and adding and working on the next version. So feeding that input back in, not just feeling like, okay, I got the certification, I'm done, but really thinking, okay, how can we push forward? What more can we do? So those are some thoughts from my end.
Thanks, Louisa. That's super fascinating. Maria, I'd love to hear your response to this question.
Well, I think the points that Louisa raised are extremely important, and I'm very happy that in this panel we have people that come from different areas of, let's say, the EdTech ecosystem. And I come more from the policy side as part of the World Bank. We produce research, but also we evaluate different products that fit different needs. And for me, something that it's a key decision maker for recommending a type of program or intervention is, of course, there is evidence, but there is also that this evidence and this program or product has been thought with inclusion by design from the very first steps, because as part of the principles and some of the things that Natalia was mentioning in her presentation, we have developed 5 principles for EdTech for education interventions, education and technology interventions as part of my team. One of them is that we need to always focus that these interventions apply to all, and that they provide accommodations to all students. And this is particularly important, it's important in all education interventions, but it's particularly important for EdTech because of the Matthew effect. Let me go back a little bit to one of the founders on my team, Michael Trucano, who published a long time ago a blog on the Matthew effect and how actually EdTech tends to benefit more to students who have better means and better learning already, rather than the students who are at the tail. So I think this is something that we cannot stop giving the crucial importance that it needs to be done at that point. But I wanted to mention one second point regarding inclusion. The second point is that when we think about products or programs, I always think about designing for real conditions, because most of the countries I work with are in the global south. I think for me, one of the things I always see is like, okay, what are the environments that this product or program is effective in? Would it be effective if they don't have the best connectivity, the best electricity? Would it be effective if teachers cannot, don't have enough time to receive a lot of training? Can this be taken on quite quickly? Is it simple? Is it clear the way it will be implemented? And does this design include also the training for inclusion for the people who will implement it, whether it's volunteers, teachers, or any other actor? But I'm keen to hear more from other people. Back to you, Parker and Natalia.
Thanks, Maria. And Andrew, we'd love to hear how equity and effectiveness influences the work that you do.
Well, I'm actually going to tie this back to certification, and there's one that we helped to pilot for Digital Promise many years ago now. It's called the Learner Variability Certification. And as a provider, going through that process was valuable. Not to say we found big gaps necessarily, but the high concept of not all learners are the average learner. And so one shouldn't accidentally find oneself designing for just the average learner or measuring usage or impact, just for that main effect, effect size or something like that. So, so going through the certification process, and this was many of us doing this as a team at our organization, just helped to put that spotlight on making sure that we were conscious and mindful about the wide variation in learners, or in, as Maria just said, learner situations that they're in. So I think I'll just stop there and maybe questions later. But I wanted to give a big thumbs up to the value of going through this kind of process to bring to the front of everyone's attention these kind of important issues about equity.
Thanks so much, Andrew, Maria, and Louisa. And you highlighted so many important points here that might be relevant for people joining us today, in the sense that evidence building really is a journey, and certainly going through a certification process can structure the thinking of designers and developers in terms of what are the intentional decisions they are making when designing, and the principles that Maria highlighted in terms of inclusion by design. Those are the essential elements of high quality EdTech. So learner variability is a very important element that Andrew mentioned, and that I want to elevate as well, because it's, you know, essential that as we are thinking about universal design that also Louisa talked about, we need to make sure that we are not centering it around the already advantaged students, but we really think about design that works for all. And it is in that context that we are really missing many positive examples of EdTech solutions that will be able to lift the field in terms of really making a positive impact on all learners. So there are some very good examples out there. There are a few, but there are some. And I wondered, Maria, if you can perhaps highlight from your experience the positive impact that EdTech can make in the field, but also acknowledge the negative impact when it happens. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes, Natalia, and this is something I think I have discussed previously with you in one meeting that we had in person. I think it's, let me go back a little bit on I think this is probably one of the key reasons that we're having this seminar, and it's important to learn about the work that Digital Promise and WiKIT are doing in terms of pushing the evidence forward, because it's important not to fly blind and to know what is working and what is not, and to learn and to reimagine and to reassess and to discard interventions or products if they're not working correctly. So first, let me start with the positive examples. You have mentioned, Natalia, the World Bank has published 2 volumes of smart buys. Smart buys are the evaluation we do of evidence in the education field, and what is working, what is a great buy, a good buy, and what is a really bad buy, something that you shouldn't invest in. Some of the good and great buys is adaptive learning. We know that there is plenty of evidence that supports it. For example, the Alex software. We have, the World Bank has invested and applied Alex in Ecuador and Dominican Republic with good positive impact. There is also MindSpark in India, and a whole array of adaptive learning programs. EdTech Toolna has done a really good also overview of all of them with the pros and cons, which I think it's really useful for policymakers and governments when they're trying to see which one could be the best solution for their context, regarding language, regarding if they want to focus in math, if they want to focus in reading, etc. So that is a positive example. There are more. I can think, for example, a structured pedagogy that is powered by technology. We have examples of lesson plans that teachers apply and modify via tablets. For example, in Edo, Nigeria, it's one of our most innovative programs. And this actually helped build the capacity of the people implementing the program there during COVID, because teachers already had these resources. It was easy to put these resources into online platforms and to use them during the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a case study we have with OECD. I can share it in the chat later. It's quite an interesting example. And on negative, so I am Peruvian, and before joining the World Bank, I used to be in the Ministry of Education of Peru. And one of the worst programs we had was just giving laptops to teachers. It was part of the one laptop per child program. In this case, it was one laptop per teacher program. The main concern, or the main thing, or the reason why it didn't work, there is a couple of papers published about this program that had no effect. It was not bad, but it was not good either. It was just giving laptops to teachers. So dumping devices, and we know this, I think that we all know this by now, dumping devices without any educational goal, it's completely useless. In fact, it could be even negative for anyone. I think about, when we think about EdTech products, we always need to think about the user, so the teacher and student, and the educational goal. If we don't ask why this product is needed, then it's not going to be of any use. In fact, I had a chance to talk to teachers who had received these laptops, and they thought it was for personal use. They were watching videos, they were doing any other things. So for me, it's very important to keep those things in mind and also learn from the things that work. Kind of, we have some idea of from the things that work. They have good design, they think about the user, they think about inclusion, they think about variability in users. So I think those are just some ideas, but I would love to hear more from Andrew and from Louisa as well. Over.
Thanks, Maria. This topic of educational goal is so crucial to everything that EdTech providers design around. And one of the reasons we invited Louisa and Andrew is that we know that at Kahoot and ST Math and Mind Education, that educational impact, that educational goal is really front of mind. So I'd like to hear from Andrew and from Louisa. Why are research and evidence-based certifications important to your organization? Why is demonstrating that research and that ability to impact, why is having that looked at by a third party, why is that important to your organization?
I'll jump in, and I'm going to kind of frame my response this way. I'm looking forward to a lot more and a lot tougher certifications. So we're at the beginnings here, and I'll mention just like one aspect that a couple aspects that I would like to see that would help further beyond kind of the did it work or did it not work oversimplification. So I would like to see more requirements along the lines of we had better be seeing a breakout of subgroup impacts for different subgroups of students. And, to get, you need to be showing that to get a certain level of approval. We should be looking at what is the impact at different doses of the program or different amounts of content covered by the students, however that would be for different programs. And we should also then be looking at, well, suppose that a pretty healthy dose, a pretty high dose got a certain impact, then we should be looking at the feasibility and achievability of, okay, at scale, what fraction of students or maybe what fraction of school building sites were able to get into that performance zone of that level of dose. And I'm telling you that all of those things go unasked by people who are selecting programs or by even people who are writing up results. And so I'm looking forward to these are great steps. And I think there's a very important future of continuing down this path of putting out standard ways for people to think about evaluating programs that are just healthy for the market. I can tell you as a provider, once you get enough scale and do enough studies, you can answer those questions.
I really love what Andrew said about looking forward to more rigorous, more tougher certifications. I think that's great. That's really important. We have to start somewhere, and all the certifications out there are very important. And with so many EdTech tools and some very mature EdTech tools at this point, I think we can and should expect more. So before I talk about why these kinds of certifications are important to Kahoot, I'll just start with a little bit more broadly related to what Andrew said. I think these kind of certifications are really important just to be having the conversation in the field about raising awareness that evidence matters, that you can't just make a tool based on your hunches or what you've seen in your own child's classroom, for example. It really does have to be based on research and learning science and a variety, a wide variety of different settings and environments. So just raising awareness, just having that be out there, whether it's presenting at conferences, webinars like this, an awareness of both, EdTech vendors and purchasers that this matters, and it's something that we should be thinking about. So I think certifications, regardless of which companies earn the certifications, I think just having them be there is really important. But from the perspective of Kahoot, there are a couple of reasons why they're really important to us. One, of course, is because we want to know that our product is effective, and we want to know where and how and for whom it's most effective. You know, for Kahoot, we are very well known for engagement, and that is our kind of bread and butter, right? It's a social experience. It's really engaging. It gets students to sit up and be active and involved. But it also helps them learn. So the certification is and doing research. We worked with WiKIT on a meta-analysis of a lot of research studies to see, you know, what is the effect of Kahoot on learning. Those are really important for us to know in what ways our product is good for learning, and to communicate that to purchasers, to teachers, so they know that, you know, it's not just fun and games. It is good for learning, and in what ways it's good for learning. And then another reason why these things are important is sometimes they open up access to not just to get more adoption, but for more teachers and classrooms to be able to use them. So some districts have requirements. You know, you can't use this funding to purchase a tool unless it is ESSA certified, whichever tier. There are you know, kind of requirements like that. And so on the one hand, companies want that so that they can get into more districts, but it's not only that, it's also, you know, we do hear from teachers very often that say, oh, if you're not ESSA certified, if you don't have this tier, then I can't use these funds to do this, and then I can't use Kahoot, and my teachers are so disappointed. So it really is, in some cases, it is also, you know, it opens up access to more teachers, and rightly so. There should be these guidelines about schools, you know, being encouraged to use technologies that have some evidence. So it's important to companies, both for, you know, their own meeting their own goals and mission, and to communicate and increase access to the users.
Great, thank you both, Louisa and Andrew. And I think we are all sort of circling around this question of quality, and, you know, how do we make sure that as we are communicating with procurement teams, decision makers in schools, that they can really make discerned choices about quality, and to what extent the different certifications out there can facilitate this process. And of course, there are different contexts for decision makers when they are, say, in the USA, or when they are in other countries around the world. And it's very much tied to the different policies that exist in countries when it comes to evidence building. As Louisa said, in US, there are ESSA standards that are very closely tied to the funding that districts have available. So procurements are very much driven by the ESSA standards. Whereas in other countries, there are no frameworks available, or there are frameworks that are perhaps not tied in with the funding mechanism. So how can we provide educators and professionals who are making very important decisions about what to invest in for their schools, in terms of these different evaluations out there, you know, like if they're interested in EdTech quality and they do care about research-based quality evaluations, how can they best select EdTech? And perhaps specifically in context of low tech and different policy mechanisms than in US. I wonder whether you want to start with this question, Maria.
Yes, thank you, Natalia. I think it's a crucial question. I will answer from more the professional side. So what would a policymaker be looking for in terms of research? For me, it's important, and it seems like it should be obvious, but sometimes it is not, or at least in my experience, it's not obvious. Even when we have very good RCTs, sometimes we don't have enough information about the user experience. And interventions may be the best, may have, I don't know, 0.08, the standard deviations, increases in learning, But if the teachers and the users don't like it, then it's not going to be sustainable. So my first point is, let's have more mixed method research, and let's have a bit more focus on the user experience and the teacher experience and how it fits with a normal school day. That would be something I think is important. The other thing I think is that we have the best evidence in things that are, let's say, very clear and simple to measure in many ways. So products that are clear, simple. However, in the trenches, in the day-to-day of schools, it becomes part of a bigger ecosystem. It becomes part of a program. So I think it's important to have evaluations that evaluate the complexity of that interplay, not a product implemented in the vacuum, but a product implemented as part of an ecosystem. And then I think it's important, and I saw a question from someone in the audience that they ask about how to think when we need to evaluate artificial intelligence. I think it's important to empower teachers and students with AI literacy and of course, digital skills. I think that should be the first step before doing anything else, because technology moves fast, and especially in AI, I think that we're getting new models every 3 months or every 2 months. And if we evaluate a model, that evaluation is going to become obsolete very fast. I think it's about evaluating a program and how it fits in that program, and what are the safeguards that we're putting in. What is the ethical use? What will be the educational goal? Coming back to your principles, Natalia, so the 5 E's, I think this is something that a policymaker or a practitioner should always keep into mind when they are choosing a specific intervention to deploy. But back to you, I'm keen to learn more from Andrew and Louisa.
So I'm just going to point in a direction, maybe for Q&A, which is these programs are then implemented within a specific ecosystem. Certainly true, and the ecosystems have wide variation. So in my little introduction slide, I mentioned the availability in the United States of, I work in math, so universal school math performance, public annual numbers. And when you have that kind of universal data and you have enough scale, and we've done this, is we're able to do quasi-experimentals and take a look at rural versus suburban versus urban school locales, and schools that are higher performing versus schools that are very low performing, and many different variations. So I'm kind of pointing in the direction of how about a future where we find the ways to do not even 10 times more studies, but 100 times more studies cheaply, quickly, effectively, than the scarcity that seems kind of to be the norm of the expensive and rare studies of the past. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just to build on that and pull out some of the things that have been said. I think one thing I would really like to see is more emphasis on 21st century skills, future ready skills, more of these kinds of skills. Of course, standards alignment and content knowledge and some of the fundamentals in math and reading are super important. But that we all know that AI is and so many other things are really changing what's important for humans to be able to do, and for us to know, for students to be successful in their careers and in their lives. So more emphasis on those skills. And yes, they are very hard to measure, but there are ways to do it. There are established assessment instruments and developing new ones all the time. So I think one thing I would want to call attention to for purchasers, for district leaders and policymakers, is asking more about that. Not just how does your tool increase test scores, but also how does it build creativity? How does it encourage problem solving or growth mindset or reflective practice? All these kinds of things. So on both sides, encouraging purchasers and decision makers to demand that, and developers, vendors to design for that, and of course, everyone to evaluate and research those kinds of skills.
Thanks so much, all. And we're going to move into our last question here for the panelists, and we'll have this be a speed round. So just 1 minute. I know we could talk about this forever, but 1 minute for answer. Where would you like to see EdTech impact research and evaluation go in the future? So just 1 minute. Maria, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Parker. I would like to see us moving from a focus in evidence in the vacuum to a focus on evidence as part of ecosystem and the variability of students. I would like us to think about equity and inclusion, and I would like us to think about the skills that students need in the future. I agree with Louisa, this is very important, and upskilling and reskilling students, I think, is going to be the challenge of this generation. So I would leave you with that. Thank you very much, Parker.
I can answer next. I think if I had to pick two things to focus on, one would be the skills and competencies that we just discussed, having more focus, more emphasis on that. And another one I think might be building more understanding in sort of consumers of this research, which is both EdTech developers, vendors, and purchasers and educators and users, because there are so many different ways to research things. There's so many different ways to report your findings. So I think building more kind of research literacy, or efficacy evidence literacy in the people who need to understand it. I have definitely seen in my work, both in academia and outside of it, that is kind of lacking, and it can be hard to have meaningful conversations about what the research tells us when not everyone has the same background. So I think that's also really important as we build up the conversation in EdTech evidence.
And I'll finish this out. The kind of old mode that I think we're all talking about abandoning is, you've got some program X, it's a black box, and does it get a green check mark on it or not? And then, okay, got a green check mark. That's what we want. And so what I would like to see is unpacking what's in that black box. And it's everything from usage and dosage, like I've been talking about, and achievability and equitability of usage access, all of that kind of stuff. It's subgroup impacts, which we mentioned, and it's other impacts besides a high stakes summative test. So, for example, on our program, we don't do this a million times. It's expensive, but we have a math self-belief outcome, and in fact, the findings showed that the lower performing students had the biggest impact in math self-belief. Super important for their futures as well. So getting away from that one study, one green check mark, who knows what's in the black box, and it's too important. You have to unpack that. And one final thing is, it was mentioned, I don't want to lose it in this mix of the pedagogical approach. Natalia was mentioning that, and I'm just so excited about people starting to focus on different programs that have different pedagogical approaches, even perhaps different learning goals or instructional strategies. And that's really where the difference in the brands of gasoline really starts to show up. Not just the price on the sign, but it's not a commodity, and you need to make an informed choice as to one style or another of the research basis behind a program. You need to know that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. And I so much appreciate the nuance in your response, both by Louisa and Maria, and what you just said, Andrew, because it tends to be a bit of a black and white thinking sometimes with evidence, even the discussions around, do we need evidence? Do we need any, impact building in the space? So I hope that what the panelists share today is something that we can continue exploring. And I can see from the questions in the audience that there are people asking very specific questions around, how can we jointly move the space? So, Louisa, you have already talked about, the need for looking at 21st century skills alongside, of course, foundational learning as well. But if we want to measure cognitive skills or 21st century skills improvement in children, how would you approach it? And the question follows up with, if in Asia, EdTechs are growing and they want to have a balance between developing a product that sells to parents as well as a product that aligns with learning sciences, how would you approach that tension, I guess?
Yeah, so I can start with the second part of the question. It is a really important question, and I think it's not only relevant in Asia, it's probably relevant everywhere, definitely here in the US as well. There is absolutely a sort of a tension or a gap where there's not as much demand for tools that are, project-based, very student-centered, inquiry-based, constructionist, all of these things. And that it's no one's fault. That has to do with the ecosystem and what everyone is used to and what everyone expects. So it is definitely a problem everywhere, and I think it's really a problem of building awareness and educating all stakeholders, teachers, purchasers, parents, just as much, about what is good learning and what is actually going to prepare your learners for the future. So some of that can happen in marketing and sales, but also in maybe some kind of, public awareness campaigns. I think as a field, we should get more creative in and how to build an understanding of that. And once people understand that, then they may have more demand, and they may look for tools that are designed to do that kind of learning. In terms of how exactly to measure some of these 21st century skills, I actually think, Natalia, you'd probably be best positioned to maybe give an example of some of the ways to measure some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a good question because it brings up the questions around how much we value only what we measure, and standardized assessments being the only way of understanding whether children learn or don't learn. But I think it has been challenged a lot, this kind of thinking with personalized education and the notion of looking at learner variability so that we understand how children actually make progress in their own right. So looking at both individualized as well as standardized assessments, and those two can work together. And when it comes to these newer skills for which we often don't have standardized measures, it is very much around this personalized learning and learner variability, where we are looking at the progress that an individual makes and a broader scope of understanding what is learning, really. So there are certainly measures for that, but they wouldn't be part of the standardized tests that you might check in PISA studies and elsewhere. So we definitely need both. And in research, there are many nice examples of those. So happy to share some studies afterwards. But that's a very nice segue to also on the generative AI question, because that is certainly another area where we don't have standardized measures for looking at the impact of generative AI on children, for example. So how do we approach that as data scientists? Andrew, do you want to share some thoughts?
I had another one tying back a little more generally to the fact that I think mostly we're talking about programs that are either fully digital or digitally facilitated. And as such, there is a clickstream of information on how every student and even how every teacher or parent is interacting with that program. And from that clickstream of information, and the conference I'm at right now is about actually developing some new metrics along the lines of being able to, so here's our goal, is to have a measurement, a metric in real time for students who are using a digital program. What's their motivation level? and being able to have a metric for, well, what kind of perseverance are they showing, right now in this part of this program, given the history that they've had on the program. With big data, you can get to that stuff, and motivation and perseverance, and then success after perseverance, earning self-belief in my case, ability as a math problem solver, having looking at different amounts of telling students what to do versus they have sense making out of different parts of the program, then teasing apart, what is the differences between motivation and self-belief from this two approach. So that the big data allows us to get, just from program clickstream usage, a lot of information about what I think of as important 21st century skills. It's not the 4-digit scale score number that you got in the spring, but how is your experience with the program developing you as a 21st century learner?
I'd like to add
Great.
on as well, on the topic of Gen AI and how we assess that. Of course, it's important to do efficacy or impact type studies after you've already created, let's say a chatbot. But it's also really important to, before you even, while you're actually just creating the model that you'll be using for the chatbot, is using every tool at your disposal to make sure that the tool that you're creating, the model that you're creating, is going to set your students up for success. And by that, I mean, what kinds of data are you feeding the model when you're building it? Are you feeding it data from all types of students, from all kinds of background, or populations with all kinds of language use or content knowledge? Or are you only feeding it data from a very specific group of people, and your students who might use it, the students who might use your product, are actually a totally different group of people? And there's a chance that Gen AI chatbot, let's say, because that's the example used in the question, is gonna be biased against the group that you're trying to serve. Similarly, you want to think about, as we talked about before, that educational goal. And so what kinds of data are you feeding the model to align with that educational goal? So if you're concerned about students using a chatbot to just kill time, well, let's look at what the educational goal is. Is the educational goal of the chatbot to provide feedback to students? If so, you can feed it information about how to provide feedback to students, so that the way that the chatbot actually functions is to help redirect student learning at the appropriate time. So it's important that when you're building that AI model, that you're using every tool in your disposal to give your students, the potential users, the best chance of success. And then you can look at what kinds of impact it's having and the data on its efficacy.
These are such thought-stimulating questions that we could be discussing for much, much longer than we have available. But because of the time, I guess we just have to wrap up and say that the last question makes us think about the need for making sure that we do not only prioritize evidence for the big and established and mature companies in EdTech, but also the startups and non-certified EdTechs that are just building their evidence journey and are perhaps thinking about their logic model, theory of change, the small things that they can do right at the start that make them focus on product quality and evidence building. So I think, Parker, that we have to thank our panelists and our audience for their questions and for being here with us, and people who will be watching later. With the hope that this can really serve as a prompt for further conversation around evidence and impact in education technology. So many thanks from myself, Parker.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Louisa. And thank you to Maria as well. We'll have this recording available online if you'd like to revisit any portion of it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.